like listening to a piano player tickling a few last chords on the ivories in the wee hours of the morning, when the last patrons have left the nightclub and the waiters are stacking the chairs on the tables. Those are words from director Jean Cassavetes on how he feels watching John Cassavetes' 1976 film, The Killing of a Chinese Bookie. Seeing Faces in Movies is a podcast where each month I focus on the works of a different director or cinematographer, and each week I invite a guest on to discuss a film and the artist's filmography. Today we're talking The Killing of a Chinese Bookie. So a quick synopsis of the film is: a proud strip club owner is forced to come to terms with himself as a man when his gambling addiction gets him in hot water with the mob, who offer him only one alternative. The film stars Ben Gazzara as Cosmo, Timothy Carey as Flo, Seymour Cassel as Mort, and Azizi Johari as Rachel. It's written by John Cassavetes, cinematography by Mitch Bright and Al Rubin, directed by John Cassavetes, edited by Tom Cornwell, and music by Bo Harwood. So today my guest is Vanya Garraway, and she is a programmer in the city of Toronto we both live in. Namely, you have a series called Pain and Sweat at the Review Cinema in Toronto. Thanks so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. I'm really excited to talk to you because I just know how you feel about cinema in general and how we both feel and how, we're both from the same city too. And I feel like some of those things like play into like how we think, about
Yeah,
films too, just where we live and who we are and our like identity. So I'm really happy to talk to you.
exactly that. It's not often you get to meet other Black women in the city who are also into film, despite the fact that I'm sure there are a lot. It's just we're not as seen.
Mhm.
I'd love for you to tell me a bit about the series that you run and how you got into cinema and specifically the films of John Cassavetes.
Okay, so yeah, films just in general. Well, if we go back, my mom was a huge movie fan, and she loved going to the cinema. My dad loved movies too, but as soon as we were able to get a VCR, he bought a VCR, and he would take us
Mm-hmm.
to the video store every week. So that's like the very beginnings. But my mom loved to be in the cinema, so I think I got that part of it from her. And then, living in Toronto like my entire life, I started volunteering for the film festival when I was 18. So I've been going to the festival like more than half my life. Um, and then I started working for the festival and I actually was staff at the festival seasonally for like more than a decade. So that was like kind of my beginnings, but also I used to work in advertising where I used to book ads for films too. When I was
Mm-hmm.
like a teenager, I became an executive assistant like
Oh,
when I was like
wow.
19, 20 at a advertising agency that had like huge clients like
Mm-hmm.
Warner's and Paramount and all that. So I worked in film in like different ways for a really long time. I used to also be a first AD on a web series called Out with Dad. So I thought I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to make movies. And then my program, I was a huge fan of all the programs happening in the city. I thought I never knew that I would become a programmer, but it actually makes a lot of sense. I kind of transitioned from wanting to make films to talk about them or write about them. I also write some
Mm-hmm.
articles for a magazine called That Shelf. Then, I was a huge fan of this program that we're both fans of, Neon Dream Cinema Club.
Yeah.
And I ended up working with them a bit during the lockdown, actually, during pandemic. And I ended up interviewing Bill Duke for them
Mm-hmm.
for Deep Cover. He's a huge neo-noir fan, as you are, and just noir in general, actually, like not even just neo-noir. So that kind of like got me closer to doing this Pain and Sweat. And then I pitched a lot of different programs. The program
Mm-hmm.
director, she put me through my paces and it worked. I pitched her a sports and kind of competition celebration and sweat program. And I think it's a good program because people really have a stigmatized like sports cinema as like a genre.
Yeah.
And really, they're just movies. They're just
Mm-hmm.
movies like any other movie. And they're often actually really about love. But I think a lot of people are shocked about how often they're about love. They're often about love and obsession. And actually, those kind of go hand in hand. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so yeah, so I'm really proud of this program. it's been over a year now, I think it's ticking along pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, you should be
Yeah.
proud. And I
Thanks.
agree, like, people have that mindset about sports movies, but they are just movies. Like,
Just
and
movies.
I love boxing movies, but I would never watch boxing ever. But
Right.
I'll watch
Yeah.
any boxing movie.
Part of my pitch was this is a program about sports and competition for cinephiles. So you
Hmm.
want to be in a dark cinema on a Thursday night and you don't mind that the Jays are playing.
Yeah.
Yeah, at the same time that you're watching Bull Durham,
Yeah.
you're not at the game. You're watching a movie about games and you're, into that. So you don't have to. But I used to play sports. I love sports. I don't
Hmm.
follow them like I used to, but I love sports in cinema and they actually paved the way for a lot of things that we watch
Hmm.
today.
So today we're talking about The Killing of a Chinese Bookie,
Yeah.
Cassavetes' film. Do you recall the first time you watched this, of what your kind of initial thoughts were and how they progressed? Well, we'll talk about how they
Yeah.
progressed as we get into it, but your initial thoughts first time you watched it.
So my first time watching it, it was like you would think that it would deter me. It would have deterred me because it was a boyfriend, a real film bro,
Hmm.
when I was in my early 20s who introduced me to. He had the Criterion. He was like
Yeah.
very early at having like a box set. He was loaded. That's another thing. He had a lot of privilege. And so he had the box set, and I hadn't seen any Cassavetes films. I had seen Cassavetes as an actor,
Yep.
but I hadn't seen him as anything that he had directed in that kind of film bro way, as we've seen, like even with Barbie, like kind of bro way.
Yeah.
He like forced me to watch this box set while he studied. Like he wanted me to just do study too. It's really annoying. But I watched Killing of a Chinese Bookie was the first one I watched in that
Wow.
Criterion collection, and I was like, "Oh, this is fucking good." Like, okay,
Yeah.
you suck a little bit. Um, but then it was also wrapped up with some good things about our relationship
Yeah.
where I was like, you have good taste and you're kind of sexy, and so I can handle
Yeah.
that over here. And then I'll watch these movies, and you can explain them to me, but I already have my own opinion about them. That's fine.
Yeah.
you know and I ended up watching the entire thing by myself and loving him as a director and finding out how great he was there too. So that's how it started.
That can be maybe a rough one to start off with. So it's good that he captured your
Yeah.
attention right off the bat. I guess it depends on who you are and what type of
Yeah,
films you
right.
like. There's some that, and we'll get into that later, which one you would start with. But that's interesting that
Mhm.
this one was, and that I've also had a previous partner who had the box set and was like, "Look at this box set," and I was like, "Sir, I know about Cassavetes, thank
Yeah.
you."
Right.
um,
He lucked out. This guy, he lucked out because I
yeah,
actually was like, okay, well, you were
yeah,
wrong.
right. Exactly. Sometimes you got to give them that one little win there. Before we get into discussing the actual film, I just wanted to read off some interesting facts about it.
Mhm.
So one of them was that David Bowie was often present on the set of filming. He was a huge Cassavetes fan. They were friends. And I guess he can be seen in shots in the crowd at the Crazy Horse West. I still haven't spotted him, and the few times I've watched it, but supposedly he's hiding in the background there.
I have to look. I'm gonna look for him next time I watch.
I know. I did look, but I was like, I don't know where
Mhm.
he is. He's probably just looking like a regular dude. So there's no way of knowing.
You're having like Bowie glasses looking,
Yeah.
for Bowie image, but he's just like hanging out as like
Yeah,
David Jones. Yeah.
exactly. Exactly. David Jones. So this story was actually developed by Cassavetes and Martin Scorsese years previously. They were kind of shooting off ideas and had thought of the initial story of a man who owns a strip club who owes a lot of money. And then when Cassavetes wanted to make something outside of what he typically made, stuff like inside the home with families, he remembered this story and went from there. Scorsese doesn't get a story credit, but I'm sure he doesn't mind.
I'm sure he's done that with other directors he's talked
Oh
to. I
yeah.
know that he's got stuff from De Palma where De
Hmm.
Palma was more excited about it at the beginning and then he ended up doing it.
Yeah. That's how it should be. If you're friends.
Yeah. especially then the way their community then
Hmm.
in the 70s.
Exactly. We do know that there are two cuts to this. There's the director's cut, which is the original release, and then it was cut down. The lead actor, Ben Gazzara, hated the original cut. And because it was a big flop, Cassavetes cut it down to just under 2 hours. And the original cut is just over 2 hours. And that's the one that was out for years and years, and the original cut was finally released by Criterion. I have seen both, but I usually watch the director's cut, and that's what I watched for this one.
I did too.
I think you kind of have to.
Yeah,
Right?
I agree.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna talk about that in a bit later, about the film and the different cuts, so I'll save it for that. But those are just some interesting facts. There's not too much on this, but I'm ready to get into the film if you are.
Sure.
So one of the first things I want to talk about is the club itself. So it's called the Crazy Horse West, which is wild. It's insane to me.
I agree. Every time they say it, I'm like, oh yeah, okay,
yeah,
that's it. I'm jarred every time it comes up in the movie. And
it's an insane name for a club, but then when you see what's happening in that club, you're like, yes, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm going to start it off by reading a quick quote from Philip Lopate, who wrote for the Criterion essay of this film. So he says, Cosmo's strip club, the Crazy Horse West, functions as a vicious flypaper to which the film keeps attaching itself, where time dawdles and dilates in a constant night. Cassavetes insisted these nightclub scenes be shot through gels, which created stylized pools of isolating red or blue light for the owner impresario to walk through. So the film revolves around this club. We're in and out of this club. The action itself of the killing and whatnot doesn't happen in this club, but this club is Cosmo, and Cosmo is this club. It's his life.
Yes.
I am surprised that he doesn't live there. And maybe he probably does sleep there a lot of the time, but it's his life. It's everything. And we keep coming back to this club. How do you feel about the vibe of this club and the energy that goes on in there?
It's strange because it's like he has to go back there. Like he'll have like a monster or somebody or like a vampire, and they have to get back to, he has to like get back to his like coffin or whatever. I feel like that's it for him. Every time he kind of has to reset, he goes back there. He makes a call there when he's at height. I'm sure you want to talk about that, but because it comes later in the film, but I feel like it is like his like heart zone where his soul is and everything, and it matters so much to him. And I think I saw that Ben Gazzara said that it reminded him of Cassavetes and his art and how he thought of art, and his obsession with film is in the same way that Cosmo, I think he probably pulled from that to play the part. It's seedy, it's kind of icky. There are familiar things, like backstage is familiar when you watch other films where there's strip joints and that sort of thing. So there's a familiarity, and then there's just like an awkwardness where it seems like time has stood still. Like you walk into that club and time has stood still, and we're somewhere between like a vaudeville and a strip joint. You know what I mean? Like a too old vaudeville, like way out of its time, that it shouldn't exist anymore, right? Like splashes of like the dirtiest, worst parts of Vegas, all encompassed in this tiny, tiny space. And it's weird. And then you see it in the daytime at one point, and it's like a totally different place that maybe if some of these characters weren't there, it could be respectable. Like it could possibly, it could have something, because when Rachel comes in, when he's with that other kind of breaking in a new dancer, it's one of the most beautiful shots I've actually seen in cinema, in my opinion, because she walks in, like J.J. Abrams would like die, because there's like, like lens flare, but it's like, you'd be like, oh my God. But then there's like a backlight too, right? And on her, obviously she has beautiful skin. She walks in. It's like, it's just so gorgeous how she walks in first. She's just a person. There's light from the outside. You don't see that in the club most of the time, where you're seeing like actual natural light. And then kind of as she gets closer to the lens and gets too close to the lens, there's also this beautiful bright light surrounding her, and she kind of sparkles without adding sparkle. It's beautiful.
It is.
So the club, with her in it and the way he sees, because that's his
Yep.
POV and how he sees her. So it's like a combination, like he has a care for her. He has a care for the club. It's almost like it's at its best moment, even though it's not a great scene. It's
Yeah.
like what he maybe perceives the club to always be,
Yep.
where we only see it really one way, but he sees it in
Yeah.
all these different ways.
I think that's exactly that. Cosmo, deep down, as much as he likes to put this front that he's like this tough, businessman who's, has his women that he kind of flaunts around, and he has his gambling addiction, whereas to him, it's just having fun. But I think deep down, he's an artist, because only a person who has a club like this would be an artist, because he could just have a straightforward strip club. All these women are very talented, and I'm sure that's what they thought they were getting into. But then there's something that's keeping them there too, because it's weird. And we have the Mr. Sophistication, who's the guy who's essentially the host of the club. This guy, he kind of looks like a Ron Jeremy type. And it's just like he's singing around, cannot sing on key. He's sweating all the time. He's wearing this weird makeup and clothing, but there's something where you're like, I cannot look away. It's like, why does he want this? And Cosmo has a hand in all these numbers. So it's like, this man's an artist.
He has a vision.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he truly has a vision about what he wants it to be. He doesn't want it just to be tits. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He wants people to like be absorbed. I kept wondering, like, what would happen if Cosmo and David Lynch's minds got together? Because like, what would that club be? Like, it would be like, obviously we would want to go there.
Yes.
But it would, like,
every day.
It would also be, would we get stuck there? You know what I mean? Would we not be able to, like, it has like, that's what I mean. At time stops, I feel like you could get sucked in there. The guy that you're talking about, the person that's the performer, I'm like, do you leave? Like, are you ever able to leave? Can you only exist in the club? Like, when you walk, if you try to step out, will you vaporize? Like, because I feel like he's from a different time. He doesn't belong. He doesn't like kind of fit in. And like, it's so true what you're saying about the women, because the women, yes, as dancers, exotic dancers, I think they're talented, and then they kind of have to play it's almost like they have to play these parts that they never expected to play, and they're not great at that.
No.
But they just kind of go along with it, and they're doing all these crazy things because they're like, yeah, I got to make a buck, but they kind of don't fit together. It was kind of like if Gordon Ramsay goes into a restaurant and then he's just like, oh my God, you're a Thai restaurant. Why do you keep making hamburgers?
Yeah.
And it's just like, and they're not Thai hamburgers. They're just like, he's not like a fusion. It's just, it's just over here you have this, and then, you have red curry, and then all of a sudden, like, you're not good at it. But you keep trying to do it all at the same time because you're trying to give something that what the people actually want, but you're trying to service your artistic vision at the same time. And people are giving you pushback. It's really interesting that this film flopped because it kind of has that vibe,
I think there's a speech by Mr. Sophistication where he's saying to Cosmo, this is towards the end, he's like, we got to talk because, I'm doing all the work and they just take off their tops and they get all the applause. But when things go wrong, they're booing me. And I think that's essentially Cassavetes through that character of, this is him trying to make something that he thought would be entertaining. And then he ended up having to cut it to be more appeasing to a wider audience. So that character is essentially Cassavetes. Yeah, it's just interesting the way everyone kind of is stuck. Some people, one of the women, when she thought that the club was going to go under, she's like, I'm only this height. I won't be able to get a job somewhere else. So what's the deal here? Because I don't want to be leaving. But it's the ties and Cosmo kind of making them feel comfortable. I feel he makes a lot of speeches in this. He's always saying long speeches. Sometimes it's like, I have no idea what you're saying. And I'm sure most people don't, but he sounds so confident and he makes you feel comfortable and like he knows what he's doing. And I think that's why this is also their home.
Yeah.
But the Cosmo character is just so interesting because we start off with he's paying off a long debt. And right after that, he celebrates by getting a debt now to the mob. So how do you feel about the way Cosmo's introduced and Gazzara's performance? And do you sympathize kind of with his character?
Yeah. I think that I'll just simply say that I think that his performance is brilliant. I think He's a great actor. I think Cassavetes had in his company like some of the best actors that have ever been on screen for sure. And Gazzara is one of them.
Mm-hmm.
I love the way like he looks and behaves. I think that it was like a different time where you could have somebody like that be a leading man, and it not be like this. Have to be like this really character like performance, but just a leading man. And I sympathize. I do sympathize with Cosmo because I'm an artist. There's things I want. There's like this desire, this hunger, and so I get that. I kept thinking throughout the entire movie, what would have to change in his life? What would be the thing where he could go on a different trajectory to feel comfortable with himself? Because he's so insecure, and he wants so much, and he has, like I keep saying, he has this vision. So it's really sad to see somebody like I think he's so hungry for that win. It's kind of like when you get like a paycheck, you haven't been paid for a really long time, and then you kind of make mistakes with how you spend because you're just like, oh, finally, like I have something. And then you realize, oh my God, I'm already almost out of money. Because you've been wanting so for so long. So when he does that, I'm like, I know you're going to ruin this after you've come so far, but I understand it. I probably wouldn't do it, but I definitely understand it. And I sympathize. But the performance around that is just like, it's so simple because obviously like, it's Cassavetes, so it's like cinema verite, like, but it's more than just, people are always just saying, oh, it's realism. It's realism. It's not just realism because it's art. It's not just, he's not making a documentary. He's not trying to even make a documentary style. It is art and it is specific. And even in improvisation, it's specific. The performance and what he gets out of people, what he's capable of getting out of people is magical. And I really do think like, it's so sad when you already know, when you can predict. And that's the thing. People are always like, I hate when I can predict things. And, we and you watch a lot of movies. And so we can probably predict most plots before they happen. And you just get to a place where it's beautiful sometimes. It's okay if you know that it's going to happen. It's the way it's done. It's the way it's done that matters.
Exactly
and it's fun when there is a surprise, and it wasn't where it went, with the knowledge that you have, but it's still good. I've seen some of the best stuff that I predicted because it's how it was done. And I think Ben Gazzara does that with his performance. So when you're leading up to it, he's going to fail again in some way, but he just takes you there with him. And you just have to go on his journey. And they give there's little drops here and there, after he loses the money, where we find out he was a vet. He's a vet. Went to Korea. He was very poor growing up. Those are set in the same scene, right? Where he was fearful. He's been fearful his entire life. He was scared to walk to school. He was scared when he walked to school. Didn't have money, He was in Korea, fighting people for his life. Imagine having all this stuff that you want to put into the world that you think is beautiful, but also being scared all the time, like your entire life. I think anybody can understand that.
I definitely agree. And there's just so much beauty in the way this character was written and his performance, because this is essentially a gangster. It's a neo-noir film. And something you said about, people being upset about being able to predict an ending. It's like, I watch a lot of noir films. They're basically the same copy paste, but some of them do it in a different way that make it so that they stand out to me. And even if they don't, I'm like, okay, that's fine. I chose to watch it. I don't need to be shocked and have it twisted each time, because then it's like it's too much because you're trying too hard. I love Ben Gazzara's face. I just love how he always kind of has like a little smirk on his face a lot of the time.
Yeah, I just love his face.
And his performance is so touching. And I do feel for him, like I said, as an artist and just as a man who really does deep down mean well. I've read some stuff where people are like, you sympathize with him, but you also don't know if he's done this before. We don't know if he's murdered outside of the war, done this before, but I don't know if it matters so much. He's someone, because we see his love for the club and why he's doing all this and the artistry behind it, you kind of just really feel bad that he really made a bad decision and who he now owes money to. And those scenes with the mobsters and like Timothy Carey and Seymour Castle, just really terrifying when they sit him down And just
Oh,
the silence in those scenes, despite this dialogue, but it's just dead silence in the back. It's
yeah,
terrifying.
the lack of score and that sort of thing is fascinating. But also, I think Seymour Cassell, because particularly, you know what, why it works is because I feel like with Ben Gazzara, there is like a warmth there sometimes that we're
Hmm.
seeing. And with them, they smile more than he does. And
Yes.
they smile more and they are maybe even seem more cordial on the surface, but you know that there's like this coldness. And
Yeah.
with Ben Gazzara, he doesn't have some of the things that they have, like he doesn't have some of the refined things. I'm not saying they're really refined. I'm just he's
Hmm.
even not more less refined, and yet there's like a warmth there, and
Yeah.
they are playing it. They're like smiling at him, or they're like, "Oh, it's okay, everything's okay," but nothing's okay. Nothing's okay,
Yeah.
and so what they're like trying to keep saying that it is, and you don't believe them, and
Hmm.
so it makes you feel really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Uh, and there's like an authority the way they speak to him, and yet they're trying to be like polite. Nobody actually in this movie is very polite at
No.
all. And that I kind of love that too, because sometimes I feel like it's when something's very scripted and it's like, well, this is the way people behave in real life, but that's not maybe the way gangsters behave. And I like that
No.
Cassavetes is just like, no one's asking somebody please or thank you. They're like, I want it the way I want it, the way I asked for it. You know,
Yep.
like there's one point where Ben Gazzara says, Rach, and he hands her a jacket. He's like, he hands his jacket to her and he's like, Rach, it's hot. It's hot down here.
Yeah, I
Right?
know.
And she takes his jacket. He doesn't say, can you hold my jacket for me? I'm very hot.
No.
He just says, right. Right. And
Yeah.
even Seymour Cassel was like, ask for a beer, and he doesn't say play please, he doesn't say thank you, he
No.
doesn't say, he just says it. And I love that there's no like trying to be like, oh, and people just know who they are. People know who
Yeah.
they are. They see them and they identify them quickly, like the way you would identify like a cop and know it's a cop.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? But I just think that that's why it works, is that there is like this instant warmth with him, even though he's kind of a bad guy. But
Hmm.
they are feigning a kind of like respectability, and it's so cold and it's like sociopathic. It comes from nowhere. Especially Seymour Cassel, because he just has like this softness to his voice
Yeah.
too,
Hmm.
where it's you would a kind of voice where you would think you would find comfort usually, but everything he's saying is like going in and you're like, this is awful and scary.
Yeah. There's an uneasiness
Yes.
to the way I do see like the comfort, but then there's something in his eyes and the way he's performing it where you're like, I do not trust this man at all. And in the way he's dressed. But it's like he doesn't often, Cassavetes, have action sequences in his films. Like there's this one,
Hmm.
this later on, there's Gloria. So the action sequences that we get are minimal enough, but there's a sense of dread, in the underground car path, our parking lot.
Hmm.
Again, no score, and they're two guys, cat and mouse game of chase. And even when he's going through the house of the bookie's house, the potential bookie's house, it's just him going from room to room, and you're like, something is going to happen. It's too silent. And you're just
Yes.
following that dread that builds in this. And it's like, it's kind of horrifying.
No, yeah, there's not even like it almost seems like there's not even that atmospheric sound that you
Hmm.
get when you're, by yourself, or even in other movies where there's something like a hum. There's not even that. It's just like devoid of
Hmm.
all sound,
Yeah.
like space. And he's also not afraid of Cassavetes is not afraid of darkness and dark patches and things. So when you walk into a darkened area, there's not just like an artificial light just so you know what's happening in there. No, there's darkness, and then you're clueless for a moment
Yeah.
until they move to another. And I love that because I'm the kind of person where I always say, like, when people make black and white, for instance, nowadays, I'm always like, well, it's too soft, too soft. I need more
Hmm.
shadows and darkness. And I want to like not even know. I have said many times, I don't even want to know what's happening over there. I'm fine
Yeah.
with not knowing what's happening over there until I'm able to see those people again. So
Yeah.
there's moments like that in this film. So makes it creepier in those moments where they move from one place to another, and you're like, well, I don't even know. I'm not sure. You
Yeah.
know, I love that.
And that kind of brings us to his use of handheld in this and how shaky and the camera work is because you kind of have this chaos that's happening within these people's lives. And sometimes it gets right up in people's business, right up in their faces. And you're like, it's like suffocating, but it's at the times where you need to be, right up in their business, seeing how stressed they are. And we see that with different characters in different instances. But how do you feel about the use of handheld in here and how he just follows the characters through whatever they're doing, whether it's a dance routine or him being chased from, a bunch of people?
Why I love it is because most of the time he's not using it. So then it really cranks up that tension because he's also not afraid to it's static, camera, static, static. And we're just watching, like, he's walking down the street, walking towards the camera, and the camera's static, and he walks right in. He's like, his shoulder, like, almost like nails the camera before there's a cut. And, it's constantly like that, just like tableau, little paintings. And then all of a sudden, it's like we're feeling the tension of the movement of the camera. And so it's economical, it's not greedy. It is what it is. It needs what it needs to be in the moment. I think that's what cinema verite maybe is. And that's why I get frustrated when people are like, oh, it's about just being real. It's not just about being real. It's about looking at the moment and seeing what it needs in that moment and then doing that thing, but not artificially making that choice. Not saying, we're going to move the camera here. We're going to use handheld here where there's no reason for it. You know what I mean? We're going to do a close up where there's no reason for it. We're going to close in with the lens as opposed to have that person approach the lens. That's what, to me, cinema verite is, and that's why Cassavetes is like a master at it, because he's just letting the moment meet the camera, as opposed to forcing it to be something that it's not.
Yep. I agree. I see a lot of because I recently just finished off Robbie Mueller month, and they have those similar, very different looks to their films, but same sort of mindset of being like, this is what's happening here at this time. Just utilize this real thing as opposed to creating something that's not, real or forcing new lights into a situation. If it's dark here, it's dark. We might flash a light that needs to be use an actual flashlight if he needs a flashlight. I like that. And Cassavetes often operated his own camera. He very rarely had cinematographers on set. He's like, don't worry, I'll do it myself. He also probably had no money to pay someone.
He had nothing because he's paying for it himself. And, he edited out of his own house too, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I love that, which I guess brings us to the different cuts of this film. So we kind of touched upon that before, that it was a flop when it was released. It was 135 minutes, so that's just over 2 hours. It eventually was cut down to 108, I believe.
Yes.
And that's the cut that most people saw from there on out until Criterion released it. A lot of the stuff that was cut, some scenes were rearranged, but a lot of the cuts were the longer sort of what people, I guess, would say it's being meandering scenes. So something like, there's a scene where before he gets to the bookie's house, he stops off at a restaurant to get 12 burgers. And there's a long scene there where he's talking to the woman's like, can I wrap these individually? He's like, no. And he can't tell her why. He's like, my wife doesn't like the wrap.
It's actually kind of a great lie. Yeah.
Right. It's a great scene, but that's something that's not in the other one because doesn't, for him, I guess he was like, well, I had to cut something because people are saying there's too much nonsense in this. And a lot of the dance routines were shortened because sometimes they overstay their welcome in an awkward way, and I love it, but I think it purposefully overstaying its welcome where you're like, okay, this is running long. I know we both mentioned we watched the director's cut, but I guess we want to talk about what causes people to have to do that and change their vision, especially at a time like that. And now the fact that everyone is just watching the director's cut now. I can't imagine people watching the original other cut.
I mean, sometimes it's, people watch things differently at different times. And sometimes it's about finding a champion, that looks at your film and loves it. That's why I love being a programmer. Sometimes most of the time, well, it's partly, there's many different factors. When people come to see a film that I've screened and they say, then they don't know me, they don't trust me yet, they don't know, what kind my
Oh
taste
yeah.
is. And then,
Okay.
like, no, that's, they don't know. And then they see one of the films
Mm-hmm.
I screen. And then all of a sudden, when they're leaving, they're like, that was actually good. Or that was,
Mm.
I
Yeah.
didn't know. I didn't know. And so I love being a programmer because I can champion films that I think are,
Mm-hmm.
great, that maybe people, even films that were considered great at its time, like I Spring Breaking Away, and
Yeah.
this summer, and people, it was great in its time. It was talked about all the time. It won Best Screenplay, and people have forgotten that it
Yep.
exists. And they're like, that was actually good. I'm like, yeah, because I'm like pulling it. It's like a time capsule. I'm pulling this thing. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
you need a champion. I was watching Roger Ebert talk about Chinese Bookie, and he said he saw it, of all places, at Toronto Film Festival.
Oh.
And he was really pumped. He was really pumped about the movie. He was
Mm-hmm.
just like, people should see this. I can't believe it came out a few years before, and I can't believe it was a flop. It's baffling to me. It was baffling to him that it was a flop. He didn't understand that. It was actually put on like it was like, I think it was like, I want to say the fifth film festival. It was there. It was like a group of films that were like underseen or
Yeah.
overlooked. That's what
Yeah.
was part of the film festival that year, which
Oh
was all, and it
wow.
was part of that.
That's
So,
wild.
because after I watched that clip of Roger, I was like, I want to dig deeper.
Yeah.
And so that's a connection to us. So the film has a
Yep.
connection to us. But like, yeah, sometimes it just needs a champion, or the time changes, what people are feeling like at the time. It's
Mm-hmm.
something shifts in society, and then all of a sudden we're like, oh, this makes sense to me now. This feels right to me now. And it didn't click then.
I think that's what I've been noticing with a lot of films I've covered, which are now. It's funny because I'll talk to certain people, I'll be like, "Oh, you should come on." They're like, "Oh, a lot of those films you cover are like very highbrow, artsy," and I'm like, "I guess," but like a lot of these at the time when they were released, they were not loved. Something like this, or even by the time this is out, like the Blowout episode will be out, and that was a huge flop, and now it's considered one of the greatest films of all time. Sometimes it's like audiences at the time are not ready for something, and it needs to age with
Mm-hmm.
people, and you look back on it and you're like, the more and more I watch this film, because I remember the first time I liked it, but it wasn't my favorite. With each watch, I have a better appreciation for it, where I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
it's insane that this movie wasn't bigger than what it is. It's
Mm-hmm.
insane, like something like Husbands did better, which I think that's even more abrasive than this movie.
Right.
And for him to have to cut it down, I just feel like his mindset must have been very low at the time when having to do that and be like, well, I need people to see this. So let me rearrange my film
Right.
for people, which is unfortunate. But now we get people like us in 2023 talking about it.
I think it's funny. I think he's like a very confident director, you know.
Mhm.
It's like, imagine like being so confident in something and knowing you have a good picture,
Yeah.
and kind of like Cosmo, knowing
Yep.
you have a vision, and then we keep talking about that. But Cassavetes, you said that there's a comparison too. It's just that he's such a confident director.
Mhm.
You can feel that he believes in it through watching his work, that he believes in that picture. Sometimes you watch a director's movie and you're like, you don't care about this. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And that's never the case with Cassavetes.
No, I definitely agree. He's someone who is like, this is the way I envisioned it, so I'm going to put it out, and you like it or you don't. I'm sure he'd be very happy to know that, like, he's, one of the most revered, directors, and he's just such a great actor's director.
Mhm.
The dance sequences, I know we kind of talked about it, but just how sometimes you flash to the crowd and it's very sparse. There's a few people there who are kind of just like, have like this look of like enjoyment but horror on their face, where they're like, obviously this is not what I signed up for, but I can't look away type of deal. And
Mhm.
there's like sometimes there's magic shows happening, and there's like the weird music and just that vibe. Where you how did you feel the first time you watched that, and just knowing that you read a synopsis, he's a strip club owner, and you're like, this is not what I was expecting.
I think that's what made me love it.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of what is the first one I watched. It's kind of the kind of thing that made me want to continue. And like, it's kind of gutsy to be like, okay, this is, a strip club. And now I'm going to give you something that you never thought
Yeah.
was going to be the thing that you're going to see. And I think that was intriguing to me. That made me want
Mm-hmm.
to go deeper. And then the film, it's like you're in those spaces. And then with the actual killing, like it's exciting, it's ramped up, it's an action film, it's, you know, it's dark, it's gritty, you know, and then you're kind of in this, I wouldn't say safe place because it's kind of seedy and weird, but it is a little bit safer and silly. And so I love that contrast too, because there is very much threatening, scary shit outside that door. And then the club is weird, but it's kind of silly and a little goofy, right? So the fact that those things are happening at the same time is fascinating. You cross the threshold and it's completely different.
I mean, that's where he goes back after it's to the club, or he goes back to Rachel's house and he's like, I got to go back to the club. And Rachel's mom's like, you need medical attention. He's like, no, I got to go back. And he goes back to the club. And we did mention, you did mention the scene prior where I think when he was driving his car, tire blew out or whatnot. And he goes to call a cab, but then he calls. He's like, what number is being performed? You know, who's performing it? How do you not know? Type of deal. But he goes back to the club. He's bleeding and he makes a long speech, kind of basically his final speech at the club in front of everyone, in front of the girls. He makes a speech and then he goes to the crowd and makes a speech. And then it ends with him standing in front of the club and he's bleeding out. We don't see him die. It's implied. We don't need to see a long, lengthy death scene in front of the club, but that's where I think that's where Cosmo was born and died, is in this club. You know, the character of Cosmo and who he wants to be. So it's beautiful. It's sad.
I love that. I love that you said it's beautiful and sad, because I think that's what this movie is. It's like, you know, and there's a beautiful, I think I'm right about this. It's like a great mirroring too, because when he calls, when he's in the middle of an act to go and like be a hitman, he calls his club to make sure everything's like, you know, he's still stage managing from afar over on a payphone, which is hilarious to me. But also he sings, because he sings that song. He sings, I can't give you anything but love, baby. And I think that's what he's singing at the end in the club is that song. And so I love that connection where the two come together. I love that. Like he sings it there, and that's like, okay, now we're aware of a number we haven't seen before, but we're aware of that's something that usually happens at the club, and he's aware of it. And then the fact that Cassavetes is like, okay, now that we're showing you that number that he was talking about on the phone, it's really satisfying. It's a really satisfying feeling, and a great way to end it, because you're like, oh yeah, I'm part of this. I'm part of this because I learned about it earlier.
Exactly.
And you're getting this reward, a little payoff for paying attention, which I think, you know, which I think is like a great little nugget, because sometimes it's like, you know, you're doing a lot of work, you know, mentally. He's asking you, and then he's like, here's a little reward, because you were listening to him on the phone earlier, and now I'm going to give you this, which I love. Yeah, it's great. I also. I wanted to say, I love that me and you are talking about this, because when in his final speech, and he's talking about Rachel, who's black. And then he says, you know, she was a black girl. Black, you know, and I loved her. She's black and beautiful. And I'm like, and we're going to be talking about it tomorrow. Yeah. You know, that's cool. Like when I was watching it, I was just like, it's kind of cool that we're talking about this. I wonder how Cassavetes would feel about us in particular identity watching it. That I
know. I mean, that's interesting. You know, the Rachel character being the girlfriend, because they're together, and he obviously is close with her mom, and just having those two black women be separate from the other women in different ways, because as far as I see, Rachel seems to be the only black woman at this club, and he picked her to be the lover. I don't know how long they've been together. And just the speech at the end with the mom, who's just like, I don't care about all this stuff. Like, now you're putting me in danger and my daughter. So you've got to leave. And, you know, there's no words being said about Rachel leaving, really. But he goes back and he's like, yeah, Rachel's moving on to bigger and bigger things, because he doesn't want to involve her further in this. But yeah, mentioning that she was a black woman at the end, I was like, okay. Yeah,
it kind of comes out of nowhere. But I like that it's not shied away. I think it's not shied away from, and we're all thinking it. Everybody's thinking it.
Yeah.
All the people are
everyone.
Thinking it. And so might as well say it.
Right. So I like that when you're just like, let's not pretend,
Yeah, just
let's
let's just fucking
let's just
say
let's say it
it.
right off the bat. Are there any other parts? I mean, this is a huge movie. So there's a lot to
Yeah,
talk
it's
about. Are there any other specific parts that you want to chat
no,
about?
I think we covered so much,
Yeah,
you
I
know.
think we did
And
it
in
justice.
the style of Cassavetes, we don't need to
Yeah,
add more.
we don't. That's a let's get all the points out. We've gushed, and I think we're good. So I'm ready for the last portion of the show, which is end credits. So I got two
Mhm.
questions for you. First one being, if someone's never watched a Cassavetes film before, they come to you for a recommendation, which of his films would you recommend they start off with and why?
Oh, it's so hard. I would say this movie because that's how I started, and I know that's not putting a lot of thought in it, but I just feel like it
Hmm.
has this excitement,
Hmm.
and enough surprises that make you intrigued about what he could do, you know.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm gonna say this movie.
Yeah. I agree. I think this era, the 70s era of Cassavetes is basically you could pick any of them because it perfectly shows exactly what he's about
Hmm.
and what he has to offer. So something like this, A Woman Under the Influence, Minnie Moskowitz, you could start with any of those and you know what you're getting into and you can branch off from there. They're the only one I always say I wouldn't recommend to start off with is Husbands. As much as I like it, I'm always like, it's a lot for a
Yeah, I don't
person.
know if I even think that, yeah, like even in Women Under the Influence, like I feel like you got to be in the right mood because it's like
Yeah,
it can
it's
take
a
you
lot.
places. It can take you some
Yeah,
dark, deep places. You know what I
yeah.
mean? The performances are incredible. It's probably one of his most lauded films. Like
Hmm.
it did really well critically too. But I feel like you might be like, I don't know if I want to go through this again if this is the way he
Yeah,
is. Where this one, I feel like there's like, you get a fairly unscathed.
yeah, exactly. You don't really need to sit like in a dark room afterwards. You're like, okay, that was a good time, good enough time.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
That's fair. The second question, last question, is the double bill.
Uh-huh.
As a programmer, I'm sure you know all about double bills,
Hmm.
and I like to, whenever I watch a movie, I don't know, it's just a weird thing that I have. I'm always like, oh, I would pair with this one. This would make a
Same.
great double bill.
Me
So
too. I do it all the time.
So what film or films would you pair this one with and why?
Okay, so maybe I would do something really weird. Let me think. Like in the middle. Maybe I do like
Mm,
three films and do something like that's like
mm,
what? Why that? In
yeah.
right in the center. I do like okay. So I would show this movie with Thief, but
Okay.
in the middle I would show like Hustlers or something like that.
Mm, nice. Yeah.
Or or you know what, burlesque or something like that. Like
Yeah.
just right in the middle. No, probably hustlers. Because it's like just getting caught in like these trappings.
Yep.
People with an idea of something that they wanted to happen. And then it not happening the way they thought
Hmm.
it was supposed to happen, like certain people trusting people and then having that taken away. And then I think I would probably finish with Thief. Probably start with this.
Yeah.
I feel like even though it's not the same story, I understand there's like there's a point in the movie where he says it's close to the end where he says your truth is, your
Hmm.
truth and it's is my falsehood and my truth and it's your falsehood or whatever. And that really reminds me of Thief. And there's like a lot of like because it kind of reminds me of like we say speak your truth, now
Yeah.
a lot. Not that was probably an older phrase, but it's like we're using it in a different way now. And then I always think about Thief. One of the things that stands out to me of Michael Mann's Thief is that he has like a vision board
Yeah.
and stuff like that. Like a man with a vision board. I feel like I love how Michael Mann
It's so
like has.
sweet.
I love the machismo of
Hmm.
both films, but then the sensitivity,
Yep.
at the same time. It's beautiful. So I feel like those two, even just as a double bill together,
Hmm.
would be really great. And they both go into these houses. They're both the points
Yeah.
where they go into this house. So there's like similar looks. There's also some coloring that's the same, except the Thief is like a more heightened, like candy note neon kind
Hmm.
of version of it. And then I'm just throwing Hustlers because it would be fun, a
Yeah,
fun like middle,
exactly.
and it also has like a burlesque feel, and then also like a crime element that where there's unexpected things happen. So I feel like if I was going to do triple bill there, but if it was just the two, that would be the pair.
That would be fun. I think I agree with the order as well, because especially if you're doing a triple, having, Bookie first and then something fun. And then
Yeah.
Thief is not that it's not fun or fun. It's just that it also has that music to keep you going.
Yeah, it has
And, yeah.
Tangerine Dream, but also the reason why I put it in that order, there's method to my madness, is because I feel like if you put Thief in the middle or at the beginning, there is like an intensity, especially
Yeah.
at the end, that I feel like you wouldn't be able to let go of, and you wouldn't be able to watch the next two films in the right way. It would overwhelm, it would totally like eat up the next two films. There's gotta be a balance, even if it's a harder end, even if it's
Yeah.
like a meaner end, which Thief would be
Mm-hmm.
the hardest end. That's better than having a hard end and then being like, oh, I still have to watch two movies. You might not want to sit through the next two.
Mm-hmm. I
So
agree.
yeah. And then Tangerine Dream and that vibe has that more late night
Exactly.
vibe,
That's
right?
when you're like, I want to end my night with this
Yeah.
one. So
Yeah.
I feel that. The ones that I paired it with, I kind of went around the same route of you. So the first one I would do if I did a triple bill would be I start off with Flamingo Road, which is a Michael
Oh, yeah.
Curtiz,
Yeah.
1949. It's Joan Crawford. She's getting out of jail, and she's out for revenge. She starts working at this club. There's a bit of gambling. There's corruption of, the police chief in the city. So it's a noir in that sense, and just having that start off with Joan Crawford, who, in my opinion, can handle anything that's thrown at her. She's my queen. But having a woman at the start and her story and that corruption and the gambling. So I would start off with that. Then I think I would go with Bookie. And then at the end, I wanted something more fun, but it's not a comedy. It's a serious enough movie, but it's a little goofy because it's the 80s. And I thought of 8 Million Ways to Die, the Hal Ashby movie.
Nice. Oh, I
just
like
having that. I don't know why immediately as I was watching this, I was like, I kind of want to rewatch 8 Million Ways to Die. And just having that kind of 80s, like pumping up, sort of like Thief, except Thief is a lot more serious than this one is.
Yeah, it's more of a hard landing for sure. Yeah.
So it just has something kind of less heavy at the end to end off the night. But
I like those.
Very 80s.
I like both those. That'd be like a nice, awesome series or a whole weekend of art films, like 6 films. That's pretty nice.
I think. I mean, those. I would go to all those. I feel like
me too.
Those are great movies to watch together.
Yeah.
Well, that was The Killing of a Chinese Bookie. Thank you so much, Vanya, for coming in with your knowledge about the film and chatting with me about such a big one. So, this is a big one. So I think we did it justice, but thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such a great time. I want to come back. It's so
well,
so
there
smart.
you go. It's on record now, so you'll have to come back. Seeing Faces in Movies is an official podcast of the Royal Film Club. It's hosted and edited by Felicia and Roney, with intro music by Lamar Walker. If you like what you heard, let us know at seeingfacesinmovies.com or send us an email at seeingfacesinmovies@gmail.com. And while you're at it, please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to your podcast. And stay tuned for our next episode on opening night.